Everyone at Precision Point Shooting Range knew Maya Rodriguez as the quiet woman behind the counter who processed memberships and handed out safety equipment with barely a whisper. What they didn't know was that the unassuming 31-year-old clerk sorting ammunition receipts had once been Staff Sergeant Maya "Ghost Shot" Rodriguez, the most lethal sniper in Marine Corps' history, with 67 confirmed kills across 4 combat deployments. Maya had perfected the art of invisibility in her civilian life just as thoroughly as she had mastered it in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her petite 5'3" frame moved through the shooting range like a shadow, her shoulder-length black hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail that revealed tired brown eyes that had seen too much. She wore the same faded blue polo shirt with the Precision Point logo every day, paired with well-worn jeans that had replaced the desert camouflage she'd worn for 8 years of active duty. The shooting range occupied a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Montana, a converted warehouse that housed 12 indoor lanes, a pro shop, and a small cafe where regulars gathered to discuss their latest firearms purchases. Maya's workstation sat in the corner of the main lobby, a cramped desk surrounded by filing cabinets filled with membership applications, safety waivers, and ammunition inventory sheets. Most customers barely acknowledged her existence beyond the necessary interaction to check in for their range time. "Maya, honey, can you grab me another box of 9mm from the back?" called out Diane Brewster, the range's day manager, without looking up from her own paperwork. Diane was a former police officer in her 50s who treated Maya with the casual indifference reserved for part-time employees who seemed content to stay in the background. The request carried the tone of someone addressing hired help rather than asking a favor between colleagues. Maya nodded silently and made her way to the ammunition storage room, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. She moved with an economy of motion that most people interpreted as efficiency, but was actually the result of years of training that had taught her to minimize any movement that might give away her position to enemy observers, even in the safety of a civilian shooting range. Muscle memory guided her steps with the precision of someone who had once needed absolute silence to stay alive. The storage room was Maya's favorite place in the entire facility, a windowless space lined with metal shelving that held thousands of rounds of ammunition in carefully organized rows. She found peace in the methodical task of inventory management, counting boxes of cartridges and updating the computerized tracking system that monitored every round sold. It was detail-oriented work that required precision and attention, qualities that had once meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure in places where American soldiers depended on her ability to eliminate threats from impossible distances. As she counted boxes of 9mm ammunition, Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her left hand, a memento from a piece of shrapnel that had torn through her shooting glove during a firefight outside Kandahar. The wound had healed cleanly, but the mark served as a permanent reminder of the moment she decided to leave military service behind. Not because she couldn't handle the physical dangers of combat, but because she'd grown tired of carrying the weight of taking human lives, even when those lives belonged to people who were trying to kill her and her fellow Marines. The transition to civilian life had been more difficult than any mission she'd ever undertaken. After 8 years of purpose-driven service where every day brought clear objectives and measurable outcomes, Maya found herself adrift in a world that seemed to move without direction or urgency. The skills that had made her legendary in military circles, patience, precision, the ability to remain perfectly still for hours while waiting for the perfect shot, had no obvious application in civilian employment. She'd tried several jobs after her discharge from the Marines. A brief stint as a security guard at a shopping mall had ended when she'd grown frustrated with the meaningless nature of the work. An attempt at college using her GI Bill benefits had foundered when she'd found herself unable to concentrate on theoretical discussions while her mind remained focused on practical applications. A job at a sporting goods store had seemed promising until the manager had asked her to wear a more revealing uniform to attract male customers, a request that had resulted in her immediate resignation. Precision Point had offered something different, a place where her familiarity with firearms was an asset rather than a curiosity, where her knowledge of ballistics and ammunition could be useful without drawing unwanted attention to her background. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover rent on her small apartment and basic living expenses, but Maya had discovered that she didn't need much to be content. After years of living out of a rucksack in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, her current lifestyle felt luxurious by comparison. The other employees at Precision Point treated her with polite indifference that suited Maya perfectly. Diane Brewster managed the day-to-day operations with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with bureaucracy and regulations. Tommy Patterson, the head range safety officer, was a retired Army sergeant who supervised the shooting lanes and ensured that customers followed proper safety protocols. Lisa Chang handled the pro shop, selling firearms and accessories to customers who ranged from serious competitive shooters to weekend hobbyists looking for recreational shooting experiences. None of them had bothered to ask about Maya's background beyond the basic information required for employment. Her military service was noted on her application, but the specific details of her duties remained unexamined. The generic term infantry covered a multitude of specializations, and Maya had no interest in correcting anyone's assumptions about her role in the Marines. Let them think she'd been a regular grunt who'd never seen combat. It was easier than explaining why a decorated sniper was working for $15 an hour processing membership applications. The customers who frequented Precision Point represented a cross-section of Cedar Falls society. Retirees who enjoyed recreational shooting as a social activity. Police officers maintaining their marksmanship qualifications. Hunters preparing for upcoming seasons. Competitive shooters training for regional matches. Business people who viewed firearms ownership as a practical necessity for personal protection. Each group had its own culture and customs, but most treated Maya as part of the facility's furniture rather than a person worth acknowledging. "Excuse me, miss," came a voice from behind the counter as Maya returned from the storage room with Diane's ammunition. The speaker was a man in his 40s wearing expensive hunting gear and a confident smile that suggested he was accustomed to being the center of attention. "I'm looking for someone who knows about long-range shooting. I've got a custom rifle that's not grouping the way it should, and I need an expert opinion." Maya looked up from her paperwork, studying the customer with eyes that automatically assessed threat levels and behavioral patterns. "Tommy Patterson is our range safety officer," she said quietly, gesturing toward the shooting lanes where Tommy was helping another customer adjust his stance. "He's got extensive experience with rifle accuracy issues." The man's smile widened in a way that made Maya's skin crawl. "Actually, I was hoping to find someone who might be available after hours for some private instruction. I'm willing to pay premium rates for the right kind of personal attention." Maya's expression didn't change, but her right hand moved instinctively toward her hip where her sidearm would have been during her military service. 8 years of combat deployments had given her extensive experience with men who mistook professional competence for personal availability. "I process memberships and handle inventory," she replied in the same quiet tone. "You'll need to discuss instruction services with management." "Come on now," the man persisted, leaning against the counter, in a way that invaded Maya's personal space. "A pretty little thing like you must know something about guns. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime and you could show me how to handle my weapon properly." Before Maya could respond, Tommy Patterson appeared beside the counter with the purposeful stride of someone who'd dealt with similar situations many times before. "Sir, I couldn't help but overhear your request for shooting instruction. Let me get you set up with our certified instructors who can help you with your accuracy issues." The man's confident demeanor evaporated under Tommy's steady gaze. "Actually, I just remembered I have another appointment. Maybe some other time." He left quickly, avoiding eye contact with either Maya or Tommy. Tommy watched him go, then turned to Maya with a concerned expression. "You okay? That guy was way out of line." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya nodded, already returning her attention to the paperwork on her desk. "Thanks for the assist. Some people don't understand professional boundaries. Unfortunately, we get a few creeps like that," Tommy said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with problem customers before. "Just let me know if anyone else gives you trouble. Part of my job is making sure everyone feels safe here." Maya appreciated Tommy's intervention, but she also knew that she could have handled the situation herself if necessary. Her military training had included extensive instruction in hand-to-hand combat and close-quarters defense techniques. The customer's inappropriate behavior was annoying rather than threatening, but Maya had learned to let others handle such situations when possible. Drawing attention to her capabilities would only lead to questions she preferred not to answer. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, preparing for the weekend shooting activities. Maya processed range fees, checked membership cards, and handed out safety equipment with the mechanical efficiency that had become second nature. Each transaction was brief and impersonal, exactly the way she preferred it. The less attention she drew to herself, the better. As closing time approached, Maya began her end-of-day routine of updating inventory records and securing the cash register. The range would be closed on Sunday, giving her a rare day off that she typically spent hiking in the mountains that surrounded Cedar Falls. The solitude and physical challenge of mountain trails provided a peaceful contrast to the indoor environment of the shooting range, and the elevation reminded her of some of the more beautiful locations she'd experienced during her military service. Diane emerged from her office, carrying a stack of insurance forms that required filing. "Maya, honey, can you make sure these get into the right folders before you leave? Insurance company is doing their annual review next week, and they want everything organized perfectly." Maya accepted the forms without comment, adding them to her growing list of administrative tasks. She'd discovered that her military experience with documentation and record-keeping translated well to civilian employment, even if the stakes were considerably lower. Instead of tracking ammunition expenditures that could mean the difference between mission success and failure, she was now monitoring insurance compliance that affected profit margins and regulatory approval. The last customer of the day was an elderly man named Frank Morrison, who visited the range twice a week to maintain his marksmanship skills. Frank was a Korean war veteran who'd served as an infantry rifleman and still took pride in his shooting ability despite his advancing age. Unlike most customers, Frank always acknowledged Maya with a respectful nod and a few words of conversation. "Evening, Maya," Frank said as he returned his hearing protection and safety glasses. "Range was running smooth today. You folks do good work keeping this place organized." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Maya replied, accepting the equipment and checking it for damage before returning it to storage. "Your groups look tight today. That new scope working out for you?" Frank's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoyed discussing his hobby with a knowledgeable listener. "Oh, it's a beauty. German glass, crystal clear at 200 yards. Course my eyes aren't what they used to be, but the equipment helps make up the difference." Maya nodded politely, though she knew that Frank's tight groups at the range's maximum distance of 50 yards would have been considered unacceptably loose during her military service. The longest confirmed kill of her career had been at 1,847 yards, a shot that had required calculations for wind speed elevation, temperature, and the rotation of the Earth itself. But she kept such thoughts to herself, allowing Frank to enjoy his recreational shooting without feeling inadequate. As Frank left for the evening, Maya completed her closing procedures with the same attention to detail that had characterized her military service. Every piece of equipment was properly stored, every record was accurately updated, and every security protocol was followed exactly as written. The habits of precision and thoroughness that had once been matters of life and death now ensured that Precision Point operated smoothly and efficiently. The drive home to her apartment took 15 minutes through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, a small mountain town that had attracted Maya precisely because of its anonymity and distance from major military installations. Here, she was just another civilian going about her daily business, invisible in the way she'd learned to value during her transition from military to civilian life. Her apartment was spartanly furnished with the bare essentials: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf filled with technical manuals and military history volumes. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photograph showing her Marine unit during a brief respite between combat operations. She was the only woman in the picture, but her gear and bearing made her indistinguishable from her male colleagues. Except for her smaller stature, Maya prepared a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables, eating while reviewing a technical manual about ballistics that she'd borrowed from the local library. Even in civilian life, she maintained her knowledge of firearms technology and shooting techniques, partly out of professional interest and partly because the skills felt too important to let atrophy through disuse. Before bed, she performed a maintenance routine that had become automatic during her military service. 20 minutes of calisthenics to maintain physical fitness, cleaning and inspection of her personal sidearm, a compact pistol that she carried with proper civilian permits, review of local news and weather reports that might affect the next day's work schedule. As she settled into bed, Maya reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 years ago, she'd been one of the most feared and respected snipers in the Marine Corps, trusted with missions that could alter the course of entire operations. Tonight, she was a part-time clerk at a civilian shooting range, invisible to almost everyone around her and content to remain that way. She'd chosen this life deliberately, seeking peace and anonymity after years of high-stakes combat operations. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Maya wondered if she'd hidden herself too completely, if her desire for a peaceful civilian life had led her to waste skills that might still be needed somewhere in the world. Tomorrow would bring another day of processing memberships and handling inventory, another day of being overlooked and underestimated by people who saw only what they expected to see. Maya had grown comfortable with her invisibility, but she couldn't quite shake the feeling that her carefully constructed civilian life was temporary, that someday the skills she'd worked so hard to leave behind might be needed again. For now, though, she was content to remain Maya Rodriguez, the quiet clerk who kept Precision Point running smoothly while hiding the fact that she'd once been the deadliest sniper in Marine Corps history. The alarm clock's shrill, beeping at 0530 hours pulled Maya from a dream where she was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, lying prone behind her Barrett M82 rifle while calculating wind drift for a shot that would save an entire Marine patrol from an enemy ambush. She woke with the same controlled breathing and instant alertness that had kept her alive through countless dawn missions. But instead of reaching for her rifle, she reached for the civilian clothes that would carry her through another day of anonymous work at Precision Point. Maya's morning routine remained unchanged from her military days, a series of precise movements that had become as automatic as breathing. Physical training began with 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, and a 3-mile run through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls while most of the town still slept. Her pace was steady and controlled, maintaining the cardiovascular fitness that had once been essential for carrying 70 pounds of gear through hostile territory but now served mainly to help her sleep better at night. The shower that followed was brief and efficient, followed by the careful application of minimal makeup, designed to help her blend into civilian society rather than attract attention. Maya had learned that looking too military or too polished drew unwanted questions about her background, so she developed a deliberately unremarkable appearance that allowed her to move through the world without being noticed or remembered. Breakfast was black coffee and oatmeal, the same meal she'd eaten before every mission during her 8 years of active duty. The familiar taste and routine provided comfort and continuity, a bridge between the person she'd been and the person she was trying to become. As she ate, Maya reviewed the previous day's mental notes about customer behavior and inventory needs, applying the same analytical skills that had once been used to study enemy movement patterns. The drive to work took her through the heart of Cedar Falls, past the hardware store where retired ranchers gathered to discuss weather and cattle prices, past the diner where local business people held informal meetings over coffee and eggs, past the small office building that housed the town's only law firm and accounting practice. Maya observed it all with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years studying terrain and identifying potential threats. But now the information was filed away as general awareness rather than tactical intelligence. Precision point shooting. Range occupied a converted aircraft hangar on the outskirts of town, its steel construction and high ceilings making it ideal for indoor shooting lanes. The building's industrial appearance contrasted sharply with the manicured lawns and decorative landscaping that the owners had added to make it more welcoming to civilian customers. Maya arrived 30 minutes before opening time, using the quiet period to review inventory levels and prepare for the day's activities. The employee break room was a small space furnished with a battered table, mismatched chairs, and a coffee machine that produced a barely drinkable brew. Maya's locker contained her work uniform, a spare set of safety equipment, and a small first aid kit that she'd assembled from military surplus supplies. Her personal belongings were minimal and carefully chosen to avoid revealing anything significant about her background or capabilities. Deanne Brewster arrived at her usual time, carrying the daily newspaper and a large coffee from the shop downtown. "Morning, Maya," she said with the casual friendliness that characterized their working relationship. "Looks like we've got a busy day ahead. There's a shooting competition this weekend, and half the participants want to get in some practice." Time. Maya nodded and began the opening procedures that had become routine over the past 18 months. Unlocking the ammunition storage room, checking the safety equipment inventory, activating the computerized range management system that tracked lane usage and customer information. Each task was performed with the same attention to detail that had once been applied to preparing for missions where mistakes could cost lives. The first customers arrived promptly at opening time, a group of local police officers who maintained their marksmanship qualifications through regular practice sessions. Maya recognized them from previous visits, but knew only their names and preferred ammunition types. They treated her with professional courtesy, but showed no interest in her background or opinions about shooting techniques. "Good morning, Maya," said Officer Janet Stevens, a 20-year veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department who supervised the other officers' training. "We'll need lanes 4 through 7 for qualification shooting. Standard targets at 25 yards. Maya processed their paperwork efficiently, checking their credentials and issuing the appropriate safety equipment. She watched them move toward the shooting lanes with the confident bearing of professionals who took their weapons training seriously. But she also noted the subtle differences between their techniques and the advanced methods she'd learned during her military service. The police officers' shooting stances were adequate for their purposes, but Maya could see opportunities for improvement in their breathing techniques and trigger control. Their accuracy was acceptable for law enforcement standards, but would have been considered substandard for military operations. She kept these observations to herself, maintaining the professional distance that had become her trademark at Precision. Point. The morning brought a steady stream of customers representing the full spectrum of Cedar Falls society. Retirees who enjoyed recreational shooting as a social activity, hunters preparing for the upcoming deer season, competitive shooters fine-tuning their equipment for regional matches. Each group had its own culture and expectations, but most treated Maya as part of the facility's equipment rather than a person worth acknowledging. During a brief lull in customer traffic, Maya retreated to the ammunition storage room to complete her weekly inventory count. The systematic process of checking stock levels and updating computer records provided a meditative quality that reminded her of the patient observation skills she developed during her military service. Instead of watching enemy positions through a rifle scope, she was now monitoring ammunition consumption patterns and identifying trends that might affect future ordering decisions. The storage room's metal shelving held thousands of rounds of ammunition in carefully organized rows, each caliber and brand separated according to a system that Maya had developed and refined over months of trial and error. Her military experience with logistics and supply chain management had proven unexpectedly valuable in civilian employment, even if the stakes were considerably lower than they'd been during combat operations that, as she worked, Maya's hands moved with the unconscious precision of someone who'd handled ammunition under the most demanding conditions imaginable. During her military service, she'd been responsible for hand-loading specialized rounds for extreme long-range shooting, a process that required tolerances measured in fractions of grains and attention to detail that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The specialized ammunition that had been her responsibility as a military sniper was far more sophisticated than anything sold at Precision Point. Match-grade cartridges with carefully selected powder charges, bullets balanced to precise specifications, cases that had been measured and sorted for optimal performance. The ammunition she now inventoried was adequate for recreational shooting and basic law enforcement needs, but lacked the precision that had once been essential for her survival and effectiveness. Maya's reverie was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Richard Hawthorne, a local physician who visited the range twice a week to practice with his collection of vintage military rifles. Dr. Hawthorne was one of the few customers who showed genuine interest in Maya's opinions about firearms and shooting techniques, though he had no idea about the depth of her expertise. "Good morning, Maya," Dr. Hawthorne said as he signed in for his range session. "I've been having some issues with my M1 Garand. The groups are opening up at 50 yards, and I'm wondering if it might be an ammunition problem." Maya looked up from her inventory sheets, her professional interest automatically engaged by the technical question. "Are you using military surplus ammunition or commercial loads?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of the analytical tone that had characterized her military briefings. "Military surplus," Dr. Hawthorne replied. "I bought several cases at a gun show last month. The price was excellent, but now I'm wondering if I should have been more selective about the manufacturer and lot numbers." Maya nodded, drawing on knowledge that went far beyond what most civilian shooters would possess. Surplus ammunition can be inconsistent, especially if it's been stored improperly or comes from different production runs. The M1 Garand is particularly sensitive to ammunition variations because of its operating system. You might want to try some commercial match-grade loads to see if that improves your accuracy. Dr. Hawthorne's eyebrows rose slightly at the depth of Maya's response. "That's excellent advice. You seem to know quite a bit about ammunition performance. Did you do much shooting before working here?" Maya felt the familiar tension that came with questions about her background. "I've always been interested in firearms technology," she replied carefully, neither confirming nor denying any specific experience. "Part of working here involves understanding how different ammunition types perform in various rifles. Dr. Hawthorne seemed satisfied with her explanation and headed toward the shooting lanes with his rifle case. Maya watched him go, noting the way he handled his firearm with the respect and caution of someone who understood its capabilities but lacked the advanced training that would have made him truly proficient with military-grade weapons. The interaction reminded Maya of the careful balance she maintained between being helpful to customers and avoiding questions that might reveal her true background. Her knowledge of firearms and ammunition was far more extensive than anyone at Precision Point realized, but sharing that knowledge would inevitably lead to questions about how she'd acquired it during her military service. Maya had been responsible for understanding the ballistic performance of dozens of different cartridge types, from standard military rounds to specialized ammunition designed for specific mission requirements. She'd studied the effects of temperature, humidity, and altitude on bullet trajectory. She'd learned to calculate wind drift at extreme ranges and compensate for the rotation of the Earth during ultra-long-range shots. The technical knowledge that had once been essential for her survival was now carefully hidden beneath a facade of general familiarity with firearms. Maya had discovered that most civilian shooters were satisfied with basic information about ammunition selection and rifle maintenance, and showing too much expertise would only draw unwanted attention to her background. The afternoon brought another wave of customers, including several members of the local shooting club who were preparing for a regional competition. Maya recognized them from previous visits, but knew little about their personal lives or shooting accomplishments. They treated her with the casual politeness reserved for service personnel, acknowledging her presence but showing no interest in her opinions or expertise. Among the competition shooters was Sandra Walsh, a high school teacher who'd taken up precision rifle shooting as a hobby and had shown remarkable natural ability. Sandra was one of the few customers who seemed to appreciate Maya's knowledge of firearms and occasionally asked for technical advice about equipment selection or shooting techniques. "Maya, I've been thinking about upgrading my rifle scope," Sandra said as she checked in for her practice session. "I'm shooting well at 200 yards, but I'd like to try some longer range shooting. Do you have any recommendations for scopes that would work well at 300 yards and beyond?" Maya considered the question carefully, drawing on knowledge that extended far beyond civilian shooting applications. "What's your budget range?" she asked, avoiding any mention of the military-grade optics that had once been her daily tools. "I'm thinking around $1,000, Sandra replied. "I know that's not enough for the really high-end stuff, but I'm hoping to find something that will give me good performance without breaking the bank." Maya nodded, mentally reviewing the civilian optics market from the perspective of someone who'd used equipment costing tens of thousands of dollars. There are several good options in that price range. The key factors you'll want to consider are optical clarity, tracking reliability, and durability. For the distances you're talking about, you'll want variable magnification with clear glass and precise adjustments. Sandra listened attentively as Maya provided specific recommendations about scope manufacturers and features, unaware that she was receiving advice from someone who'd made successful shots at distances that would have been considered impossible by most civilian shooters. Maya kept her recommendations focused on commercially available equipment that would meet Sandra's needs without revealing the depth of her own experience. The conversation reminded Maya of the strange dichotomy that defined her current life. She possessed knowledge and skills that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship training, but she was forced to present herself as simply knowledgeable about civilian shooting sports. The expertise that had once made her legendary among her military peers was now carefully concealed beneath a facade of general competence. As the afternoon progressed, Maya found herself thinking about the path that had led her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the counter at Precision Point. The transition had been more difficult than she'd anticipated, requiring her to essentially rebuild her identity from scratch while carefully hiding the skills and experiences that had defined her military career. During her final months of active duty, Maya had begun to feel the psychological weight of her responsibilities as a sniper. The precision required for her work had always been a source of professional pride, but the human cost of that precision had gradually become more difficult to bear. Each successful shot had saved American lives, but it had also ended someone else's life, and the accumulated weight of those decisions had eventually become unbearable. The decision to leave military service had been entirely voluntary, made despite strong encouragement from her superiors to continue her career in special operations. Maya had been offered advanced training opportunities, promotion to higher ranks, and assignment to elite units that would have utilized her skills in even more demanding roles. But she declined all of these opportunities, choosing instead to pursue a civilian life that would allow her to find peace and purpose without the constant presence of violence. The transition had been more challenging than any mission she'd undertaken during her military career. The skills that had made her invaluable in combat had no obvious civilian applications, and the intensity of purpose that had driven her military service was difficult to replicate in civilian employment. Maya had tried several different jobs before finding relative stability at Precision Point, but none had provided the sense of mission and accomplishment that had characterized her military career. Working at the shooting range had offered certain advantages that other civilian jobs had lacked. Her familiarity with firearms was genuinely useful, even if she had to carefully limit the extent of her knowledge to avoid drawing unwanted attention. The environment was familiar and comfortable, providing a connection to her military background without the high-stakes pressure that had ultimately driven her to seek civilian employment. But the work also presented constant reminders of the skills and experiences she was trying to leave behind. Every day brought interactions with customers who took pride in their shooting abilities, unaware that they were speaking to someone whose marksmanship capabilities exceeded their own by orders of magnitude. Maya had learned to smile and nod appropriately while mentally noting the dozens of technical errors and missed opportunities that characterized most civilian shooting. The end of her shift approached with the same routine that had characterized every day for the past 18 months. Maya completed her inventory updates, secured the ammunition storage room, and prepared the cash register for the next day's operations. The tasks were simple and repetitive, a stark contrast to the complex planning and execution that had once defined her daily responsibilities. As she changed out of her work uniform in the employee break room, Maya caught sight of herself in the small mirror mounted above the sink. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the Marine sniper who'd once been feared and respected throughout the special operations community. Her appearance had been carefully crafted to appear unremarkable, designed to help her blend into civilian society without attracting attention or questions. But beneath the deliberately ordinary exterior, Maya remained the same person who'd once been trusted with the most demanding marksmanship assignments in the Marine Corps. Her hands still possessed the steady precision that had made her legendary among her peers. Her eyes still automatically calculated ranges and wind conditions whenever she looked at distant objects. Her mind still processed tactical information and potential threats with the analytical precision that had kept her alive through countless combat operations. The drive home took her through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, past the businesses and landmarks that had become part of her daily routine. Maya had chosen this town specifically because of its distance from major military installations and its lack of connections to her former life. Here, she could remain anonymous and invisible, just another civilian employee, going about her daily business without anyone questioning her background or capabilities. Her apartment awaited her with the same Spartan furnishings and minimal decorations that had characterized her living space for the past 2 years. Maya had deliberately kept her personal possessions to a minimum, partly out of habit from her military service and partly Because she still wasn't entirely certain that civilian life would provide the peace and purpose she was seeking. As she prepared dinner and settled into her evening routine, Maya reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 years ago, she'd been one of the most skilled and decorated snipers in Marine Corps' history, trusted with missions that could alter the course of entire operations. Tonight, she was a part-time employee at a civilian shooting range, invisible to almost everyone around her and content to remain that way. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of reflection, Maya wondered if she'd hidden herself too completely. If her desire for a peaceful civilian life had led her to waste skills that might still be needed somewhere in the world. The thought troubled her, but she pushed it aside as she had learned to do with so many other uncomfortable memories from her military service. The decision to leave the Marine Corps hadn't come suddenly like a revelation or crisis of faith, but rather as a gradual erosion of purpose that had accumulated over months of successful missions and mounting psychological pressure. Maya's final deployment to Afghanistan had been her most productive in terms of confirmed kills and strategic impact, but it had also been the deployment that convinced her she could no longer continue in her role as a sniper without losing fundamental parts of herself that she wasn't willing to sacrifice. The breaking point had come during what should have been a routine Overwatch mission in the Kunar province, where Maya's unit had been tasked with providing security for a convoy transporting medical supplies to a remote forward operating base. She'd been positioned on a ridge overlooking the planned route, her Barrett M82 rifle providing coverage for a 3-kilometer stretch of mountain road known for insurgent ambushes. The mission parameters were straightforward: eliminate any threats to the convoy, while maintaining concealment and avoiding civilian casualties. Maya had been in position for 6 hours when her spotter, Corporal Jake Martinez, identified movement in a compound approximately 800 meters from the convoy route. Through her scope, Maya could see 3 figures moving between buildings, carrying what appeared to be weapons and positioning themselves for an attack on the approaching vehicles. The range was well within her capabilities, the wind conditions were favorable, and the targets were clearly hostile combatants preparing to engage American forces. The first shot had been textbook perfect, eliminating the primary threat with surgical precision. The second target had been neutralized before he could react to his companion's death. But as Maya prepared to engage the third target, she'd noticed something through her scope that had frozen her finger on the trigger. The third insurgent wasn't carrying a weapon at all, but rather what appeared to be a radio or communication device. More significantly, he looked impossibly young, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, barely old enough to be considered an adult by any reasonable standard. Maya had hesitated for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Her crosshairs centered on a target who was clearly part of the hostile force, but who also appeared to be little more than a child. The tactical situation was unambiguous. The young insurgent was part of an enemy unit that posed a direct threat to American forces. Her rules of engagement were clear, and her duty was to eliminate all threats to the convoy regardless of their age or apparent role in the enemy unit. The shot when it came had been as precise as all the others, but something had changed in that moment of hesitation. Maya had completed her mission successfully, saving American lives and eliminating a legitimate military threat, but she'd also crossed a psychological line that she hadn't fully realized existed until that moment. The young insurgent's death had been tactically justified and legally authorized, but it had also been the moment when Maya began to question whether she could continue to function as a sniper without losing essential parts of her humanity. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The debriefing that followed had been routine and professional, with Maya's performance praised by her commanding officers and her actions fully supported by the chain of command. No one had questioned her split-second decision or suggested that she'd acted inappropriately. The enemy casualties had been recorded as legitimate combatants engaged in hostile activities against American forces, and the successful completion of the mission had been noted in Maya's service record as another example of her exceptional performance under pressure. But Maya couldn't shake the image of the young insurgent's face as he'd fallen, or the knowledge that she'd been the one to end a life that had barely begun. The rational part of her mind understood that war inevitably involved difficult choices and tragic outcomes, that the young man's death had been necessary to protect American soldiers who deserved to return home safely to their own families. But the emotional cost of that understanding had begun to accumulate in ways that Maya hadn't anticipated or prepared for. The remaining weeks of her deployment had passed in a blur of similar missions and successful outcomes, each one adding to Maya's reputation as one of the most effective snipers in the Marine Corps. Her kill count had continued to climb, reaching 67 confirmed eliminations by the time her unit rotated back to the United States. The numbers represented lives saved among her fellow Marines, missions accomplished, and strategic objectives achieved. But they also represented a psychological burden that had grown heavier with each successful shot. Upon returning to Camp Pendleton, Maya had been offered several opportunities for career advancement that would have utilized her skills in even more demanding roles. The Special Operations Command had expressed interest in recruiting her for classified missions that would have represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship. Her commanding officer had recommended her for advanced training that would have prepared her for assignment to elite units operating in the most dangerous environments on Earth. Maya had surprised everyone, including herself, by declining all of these opportunities. Instead, she'd requested a meeting with the base chaplain, a soft-spoken Navy lieutenant who'd served multiple combat deployments and understood the psychological challenges that combat veterans faced when transitioning between military and civilian life. The conversation had been difficult and emotional, requiring Maya to articulate feelings and concerns that she'd never previously put into words. "I'm not sure I can continue to be effective in this role," Maya had admitted during one of their sessions. "The tactical requirements of my job haven't changed, but something inside me has changed, and I don't know if I can reconcile those two things anymore." The chaplain had listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that helped Maya understand her own motivations and concerns. "What do you think has changed?" he'd asked. "Are you questioning the mission, or are you questioning your ability to continue carrying out the mission?" Maya had considered the question carefully before responding. "I believe in the mission," she'd said finally. "I believe that what we're doing serves a larger purpose and that my role has saved American lives. But I'm not sure I can continue to take lives, even legitimate military targets, without losing parts of myself that I'm not willing to sacrifice." The chaplain had nodded understandingly. "That's a difficult position to be in, especially for someone with your skills and experience. Have you considered other roles within the military that might allow you to serve without the same psychological demands?" Maya had explored several alternatives, including instructor positions at sniper schools and administrative roles within special operations units. But none of these options had felt like genuine solutions to her underlying concerns. The problem wasn't just the act of killing enemy combatants, but the entire culture of violence and precision lethality that defined her military specialty. She'd begun to feel that she needed a complete break from that environment in order to find peace and purpose. The decision to leave active duty had been made gradually over several months of careful consideration and consultation with mentors and colleagues. Maya's commanding officers had been reluctant to lose such a skilled and experienced sniper, and they'd made several attempts to convince her to reconsider her decision. But Maya had remained firm in her resolve, understanding that continuing in her current role would ultimately be harmful to both her own well-being and her effectiveness as a Marine. The transition process had been more complex, than Maya had anticipated, requiring her to make decisions about career goals and life directions that she'd never previously considered. During her 8 years of military service, her path had been clearly defined by training requirements, deployment schedules, and mission assignments. The prospect of creating her own direction and purpose in civilian life had been both liberating and terrifying. Maya had used her final months of active duty to complete various transition programs designed to help military personnel adjust to civilian employment. She'd attended job placement seminars, updated her resume to translate military skills into civilian terms, and explored educational opportunities that might prepare her for a second career. But none of these programs had addressed the fundamental question of how to find meaning and purpose without the clear mission focus that had defined her military service. The financial aspects of leaving active duty had been manageable thanks to Maya's frugal lifestyle and the savings she'd accumulated during her military career. She'd lived simply during her deployments, sending most of her combat pay home to a savings account that had grown steadily over the years. The transition to civilian wages would require some adjustments, but Maya had calculated that she could maintain a modest standard of living while exploring her options for long-term career development. More challenging had been the psychological adjustment to civilian life, which had required Maya to essentially rebuild her identity from scratch. For 8 years, she'd been defined by her role as a Marine sniper, with clear expectations and measurable standards of performance. The transition to civilian employment had meant learning to function without the structure and purpose that had characterized her military service. Maya's first civilian job had been as a security guard at a regional shopping mall, a position that had seemed to offer some connection to her military background while providing a relatively low-stress environment for adjustment. But the work had proven to be mind-numbingly routine, consisting mainly of walking prescribed routes and monitoring security cameras for shoplifters and minor disturbances. The contrast between the life-and-death responsibilities of her military service and the trivial concerns of retail security had been jarring and demoralizing. The shopping mall job had lasted only 3 months before Maya had given notice, unable to find satisfaction in work that seemed to serve no meaningful purpose. Her next attempt at civilian employment had been at a sporting goods store, where her knowledge of firearms and outdoor equipment had been genuinely useful. But the retail environment had presented its own challenges, including customers who wanted to engage in lengthy discussions about military service and combat experiences that Maya preferred not to discuss. The sporting goods position had introduced Maya to the civilian shooting sports community, a subculture that shared some similarities with military marksmanship but lacked the intensity and purpose that had characterized her military service. She'd met recreational shooters who took pride in their accuracy at local competitions, hunters who pursued game animals with sophisticated equipment, and collectors who maintained impressive arrays of historical firearms. But none of these activities had provided the sense of mission and accomplishment that Maya was seeking. After 6 months of civilian employment, Maya had begun to question whether she'd made the right decision in leaving the Marines. The work she'd found had been either meaningless or unsatisfying, and she'd begun to feel that she was wasting skills and experience that might still be needed in military service. The psychological distance from her former life had been helpful in some ways, but it had also created a sense of purposelessness that had been difficult to overcome. The position at Precision Point Shooting Range had offered a compromise that addressed some of Maya's concerns while allowing her to maintain her distance from military culture. The work was related to her background without requiring her to discuss her military service in detail. The environment was familiar and comfortable, without the high-stakes pressure that had characterized her military career. And the job allowed her to be useful without requiring her to make life-and-death decisions that had become psychologically difficult to bear. Maya had been working at Precision Point for 18 months when she'd finally begun to feel that she'd found a sustainable balance between her military background and her civilian goals. The work wasn't particularly challenging or fulfilling, but it allowed her to maintain financial stability while exploring other interests and opportunities. She'd begun to consider pursuing additional education or training that might open doors to more meaningful civilian careers. The decision to leave military service had been driven by her need to find peace and purpose without the constant presence of violence and death. Maya had understood that this transition would require significant adjustments and sacrifices, but she believed that civilian life would ultimately provide the psychological healing and sense of purpose that she was seeking. The reality had been more complicated than she'd anticipated, requiring her to rebuild her identity and find new sources of meaning in a world that operated according to very different rules and expectations. But Maya had also discovered that the skills and experiences that had made her exceptional as a military sniper weren't easily discarded or forgotten. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, her attention to detail, and her analytical approach to problem solving had proven valuable in civilian contexts, even if they had to be carefully modulated to avoid drawing unwanted attention. The challenge had been learning to use these capabilities in service of civilian goals, rather than military objectives. The psychological healing that Maya had hoped to achieve through civilian employment had been gradual and incomplete. The images and memories from her military service remained vivid and occasionally troubling, but they had become more manageable as she'd gained distance from the combat environment. She'd learned to find satisfaction in small accomplishments and routine responsibilities, even when they paled in comparison to the high-stakes missions that had once defined her daily life. Maya's apartment had become a sanctuary where she could process her experiences and emotions without the need to maintain the professional facade that characterized her public interactions. The space was deliberately simple and unadorned, reflecting her desire to live without the complexity and intensity that had characterized her military career. She'd kept few mementos from her military service, preferring to focus on building a new life rather than dwelling on past accomplishments. The evening routine that Maya had developed provided structure and continuity that helped bridge the gap between her military and civilian lives. Physical exercise maintained the fitness levels that had been essential during her military service, while providing an outlet for stress and anxiety. Technical reading kept her knowledge current without the pressure of mission-critical applications. And quiet reflection allowed her to process the events of each day and maintain perspective on her long-term goals. As she prepared for bed on another ordinary day in her civilian life, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. The transition had been more difficult than she'd anticipated, requiring her to essentially rebuild her identity while carefully hiding the skills and experiences that had defined her military career. But she'd also discovered that it was possible to find peace and purpose without the constant presence of violence and death, even if that peace came at the cost of hiding her true capabilities from the world around her. The decision to leave military service had been the right choice for her psychological well-being and long-term happiness, even if it had required significant sacrifices and adjustments. Maya had found a way to honor her military service while building a civilian life that allowed her to contribute to society in ways that didn't require her to take human lives. The balance was delicate and occasionally unsatisfying, but it represented the best compromise she'd been able to achieve between her past and her future. The morning briefing at Precision Point took place in Diane's cramped office, a windowless room dominated by filing cabinets and a desk covered with insurance forms, customer complaints, and inventory reports. Maya sat quietly in the corner chair, her notebook open to a fresh page as she listened to the weekly update about range policies and customer concerns. She'd learned to attend these meetings without contributing unless directly asked, maintaining the low profile that had become her trademark over the past 18 months. We've had several complaints about accuracy problems with our rental rifles, Diane announced, reading from a handwritten list of customer feedback. Apparently, some of the scopes are drifting off zero, and customers are frustrated with their shooting performance. Tommy, I need you to check all the rental equipment and make sure everything is properly sighted in. Tommy Patterson nodded from his position near the door, his weathered face showing the concern of someone who took equipment maintenance seriously. I'll get on that today. Some of these rental rifles see heavy use, and the scopes take a beating from customers who don't understand how to handle them properly. Maya looked up from her notebook, her professional instincts automatically engaged by the technical discussion. She'd observed dozens of customers struggling with rental equipment over the past months, and her trained eye had identified specific problems that went beyond simple scope adjustment. But she'd learned to keep her observations to herself unless directly asked for input. Maya, you handle a lot of the rental transactions, Diane continued, turning to acknowledge her for the first time during the meeting. Have you noticed any patterns in the customer complaints about accuracy issues? Maya felt the familiar tension that came with being asked to contribute professional opinions, while carefully limiting the depth of her knowledge. Most customers seem to have trouble with the older rental rifles, she replied carefully. The Remington 700s in particular have been generating complaints about inconsistent accuracy. It might be worth having a qualified gunsmith examine those rifles more thoroughly. Diane made a note on her list, apparently satisfied with Maya's response. Good point. Tommy, can you contact that gunsmith in Billings who did work for us last year? Maybe we need a more comprehensive inspection of our rental inventory. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Maya found herself thinking about the rental rifle problems from a perspective that her colleagues couldn't access. During her military service, she'd been responsible for maintaining and adjusting precision rifles that required tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. The problems with Precision Point's rental equipment were relatively simple to diagnose and fix, but addressing them properly would require expertise that Maya couldn't demonstrate without revealing her background. The meeting concluded with assignments for the coming week, including Maya's responsibility for updating the customer database and organizing the ammunition inventory. These tasks were routine and undemanding, requiring attention to detail, but not the kind of analytical thinking that had once been essential for her survival. Maya accepted her assignments without comment, adding them to her mental list of responsibilities that kept her busy without challenging her capabilities. As the other employees dispersed to begin their daily routines, Maya remained in Diane's office to discuss a customer service issue that had been bothering her. A regular customer named Pete Morrison had been complaining about his shooting performance, attributing his accuracy problems to everything from the range's lighting to the ammunition he was using. Maya had observed Pete's shooting technique and had identified several fundamental problems that were affecting his accuracy, but she'd been reluctant to offer unsolicited advice. Diane, I wanted to mention Pete Morrison's continued complaints about his shooting performance, Maya said quietly. I think there might be some technical issues with his rifle setup that are causing his accuracy problems. Diane looked up from her paperwork with mild interest. What kind of technical issues? Pete's been shooting here for years, and he's always been pretty competent. Maya chose her words carefully, drawing on her extensive knowledge while presenting it as casual observation. His rifle scope seems to be mounted incorrectly, and his shooting position suggests that he's not getting consistent eye relief. These are relatively simple problems to fix, but they can have a significant impact on accuracy. Do you think you could mention these issues to Pete the next time he comes in? Diane asked. Maybe offer some basic suggestions about rifle setup. You seem to know quite a bit about these technical matters. Maya felt the familiar conflict between wanting to be helpful and needing to maintain her carefully constructed facade. I could provide some general suggestions, she replied cautiously. but Pete might be more receptive to advice from Tommy, since he's our official range safety officer. Diane nodded approvingly. That's probably smart. Some of our male customers can be a bit sensitive about receiving technical advice from women, especially about firearms. I'll ask Tommy to have a conversation with Pete about his rifle setup. The comment stung more than Maya cared to admit, reminding her of the countless times during her military service when her expertise had been questioned or dismissed because of her gender. She'd proven herself repeatedly in combat situations where performance was measured in lives saved rather than opinions expressed. But the transition to civilian life had brought new challenges related to how her knowledge and capabilities were perceived. After leaving Diane's office, Maya began her daily routine of checking the ammunition inventory and updating the customer database. The work was methodical and repetitive, requiring accuracy, but not the kind of strategic thinking that had once been central to her military duties. She found the routine comforting in some ways, providing structure and purpose without the high stakes pressure that had characterized her previous career. The ammunition storage room had become Maya's refuge within Precision Point, a quiet space where she could work without interruption while mentally processing the observations and concerns that accumulated during her interactions with customers. The systematic organization of ammunition types and calibers provided a sense of order that reminded her of the meticulous planning that had been essential during her military service. As she counted boxes of rifle ammunition, Maya's mind wandered to the technical problems she'd observed during her months at Precision Point. The rental rifle issues that had been discussed in the morning meeting were symptoms of larger problems with equipment maintenance and customer education. Many of the accuracy complaints could be resolved through proper rifle setup and basic marksmanship instruction, but addressing these issues would require someone with extensive technical knowledge to identify and solve the underlying problems. Maya had the knowledge and experience to address these issues comprehensively, but doing so would inevitably lead to questions about her background and training. She'd learned to provide helpful suggestions within carefully defined limits, offering advice that was useful without being so sophisticated that it revealed her true capabilities. The balance was delicate and sometimes frustrating, requiring her to watch problems persist when she could easily solve them. The morning brought a steady stream of customers representing the usual mix of recreational shooters, law enforcement personnel, and competitive marksmen. Maya processed their paperwork and issued safety equipment with the efficiency that had become automatic over months of repetition. Most customers interacted with her only as necessary, viewing her as part of the facility's infrastructure rather than someone whose opinions might be valuable. Among the day's customers was Rebecca Chen, a local attorney who'd recently taken up precision rifle shooting as a hobby. Rebecca was one of the few female customers who visited the range regularly, and she often asked Maya for advice about equipment selection and shooting techniques. Maya appreciated Rebecca's respectful approach to seeking information, but she also had to be careful not to reveal too much about her own background and capabilities. Maya, I've been thinking about what you said last week about breathing techniques, Rebecca said as she signed in for her shooting session. I've been trying to control my breathing the way you suggested, but I'm still having trouble with consistency. Do you have any other suggestions for improving my accuracy? Maya considered the question from the perspective of someone who'd spent years perfecting breathing techniques under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Breathing control is fundamental to accurate shooting, she replied carefully. The key is finding your natural respiratory pause and timing your shots to coincide with that moment of stillness. It takes practice to develop the muscle memory, but once you master it, your accuracy will improve significantly. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I've been trying to hold my breath for too long, which probably creates tension that affects my shooting. I'll work on finding that natural pause you mentioned. The conversation reminded Maya of The countless hours she'd spent during her military training, learning to control her breathing while maintaining perfect stillness for extended periods. The breathing techniques that had been essential for her survival as a sniper were now being discussed as general shooting advice, their true sophistication hidden beneath a veneer of civilian applicability. As Rebecca headed toward the shooting lanes, Maya found herself thinking about the strange dichotomy that defined her current life. She possessed knowledge and skills that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship training, but she was forced to present them as casual familiarity with recreational shooting sports. The expertise that had once made her legendary among her military peers was now carefully concealed beneath a facade of general competence. The afternoon brought another familiar challenge when Dave Mitchell, a local police officer, approached Maya's desk with a technical question about ammunition selection. Dave was a decent shooter who took his professional training seriously, but his understanding of ballistics and ammunition performance was limited compared to the sophisticated knowledge that Maya had acquired during her military service. "I'm looking for some advice about duty ammunition," Dave said, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by other customers. "The department is considering switching to a new hollow point round, and I wanted to get your opinion about terminal performance and accuracy." Maya felt the familiar tension that came with requests for professional advice that extended beyond her supposed expertise. "What specific characteristics are you looking for in the new ammunition?" she asked, carefully avoiding any mention of her extensive knowledge about terminal ballistics and wound trauma. Dave pulled out a specification sheet from his jacket pocket. "We need something with good expansion characteristics and consistent accuracy out to 50 yards. The current ammunition we're using has been adequate, but the chief wants to upgrade to something with better stopping power." Maya studied the specification sheet, her trained eye immediately recognizing the technical details and performance characteristics that would be relevant to law enforcement applications. Her military experience had included extensive training in terminal ballistics and the physiological effects of different ammunition types, but sharing that knowledge would raise uncomfortable questions about her background. "These specifications look reasonable for law enforcement applications," she said carefully. "The key factors you'll want to consider are reliability, accuracy, and consistent expansion at the velocities you'll encounter in actual use. I'd recommend testing several different loads to see which one performs best in your department's firearms." Dave nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. "That's good advice. Do you think we should be concerned about over-penetration in urban environments? Some of the officers have raised questions about that." Maya found herself drawing on knowledge that went far beyond civilian shooting sports or basic law enforcement training. "Over-penetration is always a concern in populated areas," she replied. "The ammunition design and construction will affect how the bullet behaves after impact, so you'll want to choose loads that are specifically designed for law enforcement use rather than general-purpose shooting." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Maya providing technically accurate information, while carefully avoiding any details that might reveal the depth of her expertise. Dave seemed genuinely appreciative of her knowledge, but Maya knew that providing too much sophisticated information would inevitably lead to questions about her background and training. As Dave left to begin his shooting session, Maya reflected on the strange position she found herself in on a daily basis. Her colleagues and customers valued her knowledge and opinions about firearms and shooting techniques, but they had no idea about the true extent of her capabilities. The expertise that had once been essential for her survival was now carefully rationed and disguised to avoid drawing unwanted attention. The pattern repeated itself throughout the day as various customers sought Maya's advice about equipment selection, shooting techniques, and ammunition performance. Each interaction required her to balance being helpful with maintaining her carefully constructed facade, providing useful information without revealing the sophisticated knowledge that lay beneath her. Modest exterior. The most challenging moment came when Frank Morrison, the elderly Korean War veteran, approached Maya's desk with a question about long-range shooting techniques. Frank had been struggling with accuracy at the range's maximum distance of 50 yards, and he'd asked Maya for suggestions about improving his performance. "Maya, I've been thinking about what you said about scope adjustment," Frank said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "I've been trying to zero my rifle properly, but I'm still having trouble getting consistent groups. Do you think there might be something wrong with my rifle or scope?" Maya looked up from her paperwork, her professional instincts immediately engaged by the technical question. "Have you checked the scope mounting screws recently?" she asked. "Sometimes accuracy problems are caused by loose mounts rather than the scope itself." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "I hadn't considered that. The rifle is pretty old, and I suppose the mounting hardware could have loosened over time. How would I check that without damaging anything?" Maya found herself drawing on knowledge that went far beyond civilian shooting sports, remembering the countless times she'd performed detailed equipment inspections under field conditions. "You'll want to check the torque specifications for your particular scope rings," she said carefully. "Most manufacturers provide guidelines for proper mounting procedures, and using the correct torque values will ensure that your scope stays properly aligned." The conversation continued with Frank asking increasingly technical questions about rifle maintenance and accuracy troubleshooting. Maya provided helpful responses while being careful not to reveal the depth of her knowledge about precision shooting systems. But she could see the growing curiosity in Frank's eyes as he began to realize that her expertise extended far beyond what might be expected from a civilian shooting range employee. "Maya, you seem to know an awful lot about these technical matters," Frank said finally. "Did you do much competitive shooting before working here?" Maya felt the familiar spike of anxiety that came with questions about her background. "I've always been interested in firearms technology," she replied carefully. "Working here has given me opportunities to learn about different types of equipment and shooting techniques." Frank seemed satisfied with her explanation, but Maya could see that he remained curious about the extent of her knowledge. The interaction reminded her of the careful balance she had to maintain between being helpful to customers and avoiding questions that might reveal her true background and capabilities. As the day progressed, Maya found herself increasingly frustrated with the limitations that her self-imposed anonymity placed on her ability to help customers with their shooting problems. She could see dozens of issues that could be easily resolved with proper instruction and equipment maintenance, but addressing them comprehensively would require her to reveal knowledge and skills that she'd worked hard to keep hidden. The evening brought the familiar routine of closing procedures and equipment security checks. Maya completed her tasks with the same attention to detail that had characterized her military service, ensuring that everything was properly organized and secured for the next day's operations. The routine provided structure and purpose, but it also reminded her of the vast gulf between her current responsibilities and the complex missions that had once defined her professional life. As she prepared to leave for the day, Maya reflected on the mounting tension between her desire to be helpful and her need to maintain the carefully constructed facade that allowed her to live peacefully in civilian society. The customers who sought her advice had no idea that they were speaking to someone whose expertise exceeded their own by orders of magnitude, and maintaining that deception was becoming increasingly difficult as her reputation for technical knowledge grew within the local shooting community. The drive home took her through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, past the businesses and landmarks that had become part of her daily routine. Maya had chosen this life deliberately, seeking peace and anonymity after years of high-stakes military service. But she was beginning to realize that hiding her true capabilities might be more difficult than she'd anticipated, and that the skills and knowledge she'd tried to leave behind had a way of asserting themselves. Regardless of her intentions, the first sign of trouble came at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Morning that had started like any other day at Precision Point. Maya was updating inventory records in the ammunition storage room when she heard the distinctive sound of rapid, panicked footsteps echoing through the main corridor. The sound was wrong somehow, carrying an urgency that didn't match the usual leisurely pace of customers arriving for recreational shooting sessions. Maya's military training kicked in automatically, her senses sharpening as she processed the auditory information with the analytical precision that had once been essential for her survival. The footsteps belonged to at least 3 people moving quickly toward the main entrance, their pace suggesting flight rather than approach. Her hand moved instinctively toward her hip where her sidearm would have been during military service, finding only the empty space that reminded her of her civilian status. The sound of the front door slamming open with violent force confirmed Maya's growing concern that something was seriously wrong. She moved quietly toward the storage room door, her movements controlled and silent as she positioned herself to observe the main lobby without being seen. Through the narrow gap between the door and frame, she could see 3 figures entering the facility with the aggressive posture of people who had no intention of following normal procedures. The first figure was a tall man in his 30s wearing military-style clothing and carrying what appeared to be a tactical rifle. His movements were controlled and purposeful, suggesting military or law enforcement training, but his aggressive demeanor and the weapon he carried made it clear that he wasn't here in any official capacity. Behind him came 2 younger men, both armed with handguns and moving with the nervous energy of people who were operating outside their comfort zone. Maya's trained. I immediately assessed the tactical situation with the speed and precision that had kept her alive through countless combat encounters. 3 armed individuals with military-style weapons entering a civilian facility without authorization. Their positioning suggested they were working together as a coordinated unit, but their body language indicated varying levels of experience and confidence. The leader appeared competent and dangerous, while his companion seemed less experienced but equally committed to whatever they were planning. The leader's voice carried clearly through the facility as he addressed the customers and staff who were visible in the main lobby. Everyone stay calm and follow instructions. Exactly. We're here for a specific purpose, and nobody needs to get hurt if you cooperate fully. Maya could see Diane behind the main counter, her face pale with shock as she raised her hands in surrender. Tommy Patterson was visible near the shooting lanes, his expression showing the controlled alertness of someone with military experience who understood the gravity of the situation. Several customers were scattered throughout the lobby, their reactions ranging from confusion to terror as they realized what was happening. We need access to your high-end firearms inventory, the leader continued, his weapon trained on the group of civilians. Specifically, we're looking for precision rifles and advanced optics. You're going to help us select the best equipment you have available. Maya's mind raced as she processed the implications of what she was witnessing. This wasn't a random robbery or an act of terrorism, but rather a targeted theft designed to acquire specific types of equipment that would be valuable to someone with advanced shooting capabilities. The precision rifles and optics they were seeking were exactly the types of equipment that would be used by military snipers or specialized law enforcement units. The leader's tactical knowledge became apparent as he positioned his companions to control the facility's exits and maintain visual contact with all the civilians present. His movements showed the confidence of someone who had planned this operation carefully and understood the importance of controlling the environment and managing potential threats. But Maya could also see weaknesses in their positioning that a trained operator would be able to exploit. You behind the counter, the leader said, addressing Diane directly. Open your firearm storage and show us your precision rifle inventory. We know you have high-end equipment here, and we're not leaving without it. Diane's hands shook as she reached for the keys to the firearm storage area, her movements slow and deliberate as she tried to avoid any actions that might be interpreted as threatening. Maya could see the terror in her colleague's eyes and felt the familiar surge of protective instincts that had once driven her to excel in combat situations. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly dangerous as the armed intruders moved deeper into the facility. Maya could see that they were armed with military-style weapons and appeared to have at least basic training in small unit tactics. But she could also see that their positioning wasn't optimal and that they had made several errors that a skilled operator could exploit. One of the younger accomplices was positioned near the shooting lanes, but he was standing in a location that gave him limited visibility of the main lobby and left him vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. The second accomplice was covering the main entrance, but his position exposed him to potential threats from the storage areas and office spaces that lined the facility's perimeter. The leader was maintaining overwatch of the main group of civilians, but his attention was focused on the immediate threat management rather than comprehensive security. Maya's military training had included extensive instruction in hostage situations and armed confrontations, and she could see multiple tactical opportunities that could be exploited to neutralize the threat. But taking action would mean revealing capabilities that she'd worked hard to keep hidden, and it would also mean returning to the kind of violent confrontation that she'd left military service to avoid. The leader's voice carried a new edge of impatience as he addressed the group again. "We're not here to hurt anyone, but we will use whatever force is necessary to complete our mission. Everyone stay where you are and follow instructions exactly." Maya could see Tommy Patterson's body language changed slightly as he processed the tactical situation with the analytical skills of someone who had military experience. His positioning shifted almost imperceptibly as he moved to create better cover for himself and the civilians near him. Maya recognized the signs of someone who was preparing to take action if the situation deteriorated further. But Maya also knew that Tommy's military experience had been in conventional infantry operations rather than the specialized close quarters combat that would be required to neutralize multiple armed opponents in a confined space. His instincts were good, but his training hadn't prepared him for the kind of precision action that would be needed to resolve this situation without casualties. The leader began moving toward the firearms storage area, his weapons still trained on the group of civilians as he maintained tactical control of the situation. "You're going to show us your best precision rifles," he told Diane. "We want everything you have in the premium category, along with any advanced optics and accessories." Maya watched as Diane unlocked the firearms storage area with trembling hands, revealing the facility's inventory of hunting rifles, tactical firearms, and precision shooting equipment. The selection was impressive for a civilian facility, including several rifles that would be suitable for long-range shooting applications. But Maya could see that the intruders were looking for specific types of equipment that suggested they had advanced knowledge of precision shooting systems. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The tactical situation was becoming more complex as the armed intruders moved deeper into the facility and began examining the firearms inventory. Maya could see that they were looking for specific brands and models that would be particularly valuable to someone with advanced shooting capabilities. Their knowledge of equipment specifications suggested that they weren't random criminals but rather individuals with specialized training and specific objectives. One of the accomplices called out from his position near the shooting lanes, his voice carrying nervous excitement. "There's movement in the back storage area. Someone might be hiding back there." Maya's heart rate increased as she realized that her position had been compromised. The storage room where she'd been working was located in the area that the accomplice had identified, and it would only be a matter of time before they searched the space and discovered her presence. She needed to make a decision quickly about whether to reveal herself or attempt to remain hidden. The leader's tactical training became apparent as he immediately began coordinating a search of the back areas. "Check every room and make sure we don't have any surprises," he ordered. "We can't afford to have someone calling for help or trying to interfere with our operation." Maya could hear footsteps approaching her position as one of the accomplices began a systematic search of the storage areas. Her military training had included extensive instruction in concealment and evasion, but the confined space of the ammunition storage room offered limited options for remaining hidden. She would need to either reveal herself or take action to neutralize the threat. The accomplice's voice carried clearly through the facility as he reported his findings. "I've got someone in the ammunition storage room. Female, appears to be unarmed. What do you want me to do?" Maya made her decision in that moment, understanding that her carefully constructed civilian life was about to end regardless of what action she took. She could either reveal herself as a helpless civilian employee and hope that the intruders would treat her as just another hostage, or she could take action to protect herself and the other people in the facility. The storage room door opened slowly as the accomplice approached with his weapon drawn. Maya had positioned herself behind a row of metal shelving that provided concealment and would allow her to assess the threat before taking action. Her military training had taught her to use every available advantage, and the storage room's layout provided several tactical opportunities that could be exploited. "Come out slowly with your hands visible," the accomplice called out, his voice carrying the nervous tension of someone who was operating outside his comfort zone. "We're not here to hurt anyone, but you need to cooperate fully." Maya could see the accomplice through the gaps in the metal shelving, noting his positioning and the way he was handling his weapon. His training was adequate for basic operations, but he was making several tactical errors that a skilled operator could exploit. His attention was focused on the area where he expected to find her, leaving him vulnerable to threats from other directions. The moment of decision had arrived, and Maya knew that her response would determine not only her own fate, but also the safety of everyone else in the facility. She could continue to hide and hope that the situation would resolve itself peacefully, or she could take action to neutralize the threat, using skills that she'd hoped never to need again. The accomplice's footsteps echoed through the storage room as he moved deeper into the space, his weapon trained on the area where he expected to find her. Maya could see his positioning clearly now, and she knew that she had a brief window of opportunity to act before he discovered her actual location. Her military training had included extensive instruction in close-quarters combat and weapon retention, skills that had been essential for survival in the confined spaces where she'd operated during her military service. The storage room's layout was similar to many of the urban environments where she'd conducted operations, and she could see multiple tactical opportunities that could be exploited to neutralize the threat. Maya's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed carry pistol that she'd kept hidden beneath her work shirt, a compact weapon that she'd carried every day since leaving military service. The familiar weight of the firearm provided comfort and confidence, reminding her of the capabilities that she'd tried to leave behind, but had never truly abandoned. The accomplice was now within striking distance, his attention focused on searching the storage area rather than watching for potential threats. Maya could see that he was holding his weapon in a position that would make it difficult for him to respond quickly to an attack from an unexpected direction. His body language suggested that he was expecting to find a frightened civilian rather than someone with advanced combat training. Maya knew that once she took action, there would be no going back to her carefully constructed civilian life. The quiet clerk who processed memberships and handled inventory would disappear forever, replaced by the military sniper whose skills had been honed through years of combat operations. But she also knew that the people in the facility were depending on someone to take action, and she was the only person present who had the training and capabilities to neutralize the threat effectively. The accomplice's voice carried new urgency as he called out to his companions. I can't find anyone back here. Maybe they got away through one of the other exits. Maya realized that she had one final opportunity to remain hidden and avoid the confrontation that would inevitably reveal her true capabilities. But she also knew that the armed intruders would continue to pose a threat to the innocent people in the facility, and that her inaction might result in casualties that she could have prevented. The sound of breaking glass from the main lobby area made the decision for her, indicating that the situation was escalating beyond the relatively controlled robbery that had begun the encounter. Maya could hear shouting and the sound of struggle, suggesting that someone was either trying to escape or fight back against the intruders. Maya's military training took over as she prepared to engage the threat, her movements controlled and purposeful as she positioned herself for the confrontation that would end her civilian anonymity forever. The quiet clerk was about to disappear, replaced by Staff Sergeant Maya Ghost Shot Rodriguez, the Marine sniper whose capabilities had been legendary throughout the special operations community. The accomplice was moving toward her position, with his weapon drawn, unaware that he was about to encounter someone whose combat training far exceeded his own. Maya's breathing became controlled and steady as she prepared to use skills that she'd hoped never to need again, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether she could protect the innocent people who were depending on her to act. Maya's hand closed around the grip of her concealed Glock 19, the familiar weight and texture instantly reconnecting her with 8 years of muscle memory that had never truly faded. The weapon came up smoothly as she emerged from behind the metal shelving, her movements flowing with the deadly precision that had once made her legendary among her Marine Corps peers. The accomplice was less than 8 feet away, his attention focused on searching the wrong area of the storage room, completely unaware that death was approaching from his blind spot. "Drop your weapon," Maya commanded, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had issued similar orders in life or death situations hundreds of times before. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The quiet clerk who had processed memberships and counted ammunition inventory had vanished, replaced by a combat-hardened Marine who had never missed when lives were at stake. The accomplice spun toward her voice, his eyes widening in shock as he realized that the harmless civilian employee he'd been searching for was actually pointing a pistol at his center mass with the steady precision of a trained killer. His own weapon began to swing toward her, but Maya could see from his body language and grip that he was operating on panic and adrenaline rather than proper training. "I said drop it," Maya repeated, her finger taking up the slack in her trigger as she prepared to end the threat permanently. The accomplice's weapon was still moving toward her, but his movements were telegraphed and clumsy compared to the fluid precision of her own positioning. She could see the exact moment when he made the decision to fight rather than surrender, and she was already responding before he'd fully committed to the action. The accomplice's weapon had almost reached a firing position when Maya's first shot took him center mass, the 9mm hollow point round striking his chest with devastating effect. The man's body jerked backward from the impact, his own weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as his nervous system shut down from the trauma. Maya's second shot followed within milliseconds, ensuring that the threat was neutralized completely and permanently. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 seconds, but Maya's military training had processed every detail with crystalline clarity. The accomplice's weapon had been a semi-automatic pistol, probably a Glock similar to her own, but his grip and stance had revealed him as someone with basic training rather than advanced combat experience. His tactical positioning had been adequate for intimidating civilians but completely inadequate for engaging a trained operator in close-quarters combat. Maya moved immediately to secure the accomplice's weapon, her movements economical and purposeful as she maintained awareness of her surroundings. The sound of gunfire would have alerted the other intruders to her presence, and she needed to be prepared for their response. Her military training had taught her that winning the first engagement was only the beginning of a tactical situation that could escalate rapidly. The accomplice's body lay motionless on the concrete floor, his weapon now in Maya's possession as she prepared to advance toward the main lobby area. She could hear shouting and movement from the front of the facility, indicating that the remaining intruders were responding to the sound of gunfire. Their voices carried tension and confusion, suggesting that they hadn't anticipated armed resistance. From facility personnel, Maya's mind automatically shifted into the tactical planning mode that had been essential during her military service. 2 remaining hostiles, both armed with military-style weapons and positioned to control the main lobby area. Multiple civilians in the line of fire, including her colleagues and regular customers whose safety was now her responsibility. The facility's layout provided several potential routes of approach, but each option carried specific risks and advantages that needed to be carefully evaluated. The leader's voice carried clearly through the facility as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "Who's shooting back there? We need to secure that area immediately before this gets out of hand." Maya could hear the second accomplice moving toward her position, his footsteps echoing through the corridor as he approached the storage area. His movement pattern suggested that he was advancing cautiously rather than rushing blindly into danger, indicating that he had at least basic tactical training. But Maya's military experience had taught her to use every available advantage, and the facility's layout provided several opportunities for ambush. She positioned herself beside the storage room doorway, using the metal frame as concealment while maintaining a clear field of fire into the corridor. Her breathing was controlled and steady, her heart rate elevated but manageable as she prepared for the second engagement. The familiar surge of combat adrenaline was tempered by years of training that had taught her to channel that energy into focused precision rather than panic. The second accomplice appeared at the end of the corridor, his weapon raised as he advanced toward the storage area. Maya could see immediately that he was more competent than his companion, his movements controlled and his weapon handling suggesting more advanced training. His approach was methodical and careful, indicating that he understood the tactical situation and wasn't going to make the same mistakes that had gotten his partner killed. Maya waited until the accomplice was within optimal range before engaging, her first shot striking him in the upper chest with the same precision that had characterized her sniper work. The man staggered but didn't fall, his body armor absorbing some of the impact while his training kept him functional despite the trauma. Maya's second shot targeted his pelvis, a technique she'd learned during her military service for neutralizing threats who were wearing protection. The accomplice went down hard, his weapon clattering across the concrete floor as he lost motor control from the pelvic shot. Maya advanced quickly to secure his weapon, her movements controlled and purposeful as she maintained awareness of potential threats from other directions. The man was still alive but no longer combat effective, his body armor having saved his life while Maya's precision had eliminated his ability to continue fighting. "Officer down," the leader shouted from the main lobby, his voice carrying new urgency as he realized that his operation was falling apart. "We need to extract immediately, before law enforcement arrives." Maya could hear the leader moving through the facility, his footsteps suggesting that he was advancing toward her position rather than attempting to escape. His tactical training was apparently good enough to understand that leaving an armed opponent behind him would be tactically disastrous, and he was choosing to engage rather than retreat. Maya respected his decision even as she prepared to kill him. The facility's layout provided several potential routes that the leader could use to approach her position, and Maya's military training had taught her to think like her opponent in order to anticipate his movements. The most direct route would bring him through the main corridor, but that approach would expose him to her defensive position. The alternative would be to circle around through the shooting lanes, but that route would take longer and give her time to reposition. Maya decided to take the initiative rather than wait for the leader to dictate the terms of engagement. Her military experience had taught her that aggressive action often provided tactical advantages that could be decisive in close-quarters combat. She moved quickly but quietly through the facility, using her knowledge of the layout to position herself for an ambush that would give her the advantage of surprise. The leader's voice carried through the facility as he attempted to maintain control of the situation. "Everyone stay down and don't move. We're going to resolve this quickly, and then we'll be gone." Maya could hear the tension in his voice, indicating that he was operating under significant stress despite his apparent training and experience. The loss of his two companions had clearly affected his confidence, and he was now operating as a solo operator in a tactical situation that had become increasingly dangerous. Maya's military training had taught her to exploit such psychological advantages whenever possible. She positioned herself in the pro shop area, using the display cases and equipment racks as concealment while maintaining a clear field of fire toward the main lobby. Her position allowed her to observe the leader's movements while remaining hidden from his view. The tactical advantage was significant, but Maya knew that the leader's training would make him a formidable opponent even under these circumstances. The leader appeared at the edge of the main lobby, his weapon raised as he scanned for threats. Maya could see immediately that he was significantly more competent than his companions, his movements controlled and his weapon handling suggesting advanced military or law enforcement training. His tactical positioning was good, and he was using available cover effectively while maintaining awareness of potential threats. Maya's military training had taught her to assess opponents quickly and accurately, and she could see that the leader represented a genuine threat to her safety and the safety of the civilians in the facility. His equipment was high quality, his positioning was tactically sound, and his movement patterns suggested someone with significant combat experience. Engaging him would require all of her skills and training. The leader's voice carried new authority as he addressed the civilians in the main lobby. "I know there's someone back there with a weapon. I'm offering you one chance to surrender peacefully. If you don't take it, this is going to end badly for everyone involved." Maya remained silent, her military training having taught her that communication could provide opponents with valuable information about positioning and intentions. The leader was trying to draw her out, or at least get her to reveal her position. But Maya had learned during her military service that patience and discipline were often more valuable than aggressive action. The leader began moving systematically through the facility, his approach methodical and careful as he searched for Maya's position. His movements showed the confidence of someone who had conducted similar operations before, but Maya could see subtle indicators that suggested he was operating under stress. The loss of his companions had clearly affected his psychological state, even if his training was keeping him functional. Maya watched the leader's approach with the analytical precision that had made her legendary as a sniper. His movement pattern was predictable, his positioning was adequate, but not optimal, and his attention was focused on the immediate threat rather than comprehensive situational awareness. She could see several opportunities for engagement, but her military training had taught her to wait for the optimal moment rather than acting prematurely. The leader's tactical training became apparent as he used available cover effectively while advancing toward Maya's suspected position. His weapon handling was professional, his positioning was generally sound, and his movement pattern suggested someone with significant combat experience. But Maya could also see that he was making several subtle errors that indicated he was operating under stress and without proper support. Maya's military training had included extensive instruction in psychological warfare and the effects of stress on combat performance. The leader's loss of his two companions had clearly affected his confidence and decision-making abilities, even if his training was keeping him functional. Maya could exploit these psychological factors to gain tactical advantages that might be decisive in the upcoming engagement. The leader stopped suddenly, his head turning toward Maya's position, as if he'd detected some sign of her presence. Maya remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled and her weapon trained on the area where she expected him to appear. Her military training had taught her the importance of patience and discipline, especially when engaging opponents who had advanced training and experience. "I know you're there," the leader called out, his voice carrying new tension. "You've already killed 2 of my people, and I respect that, but this doesn't have to end with more bloodshed. We can work something out." Maya recognized the psychological tactics that the leader was employing, attempting to initiate communication that might reveal her position or psychological state. Her military training had included extensive instruction in resisting such techniques, and she maintained her silence while continuing to track his movements through her weapon's sights. The leader's frustration was becoming apparent as he realized that Maya wasn't going to be drawn into conversation or psychological manipulation. His movements became slightly more aggressive, suggesting that he was preparing to take more direct action to locate and engage her. Maya could see that the tactical situation was approaching a critical point where decisive action would be necessary. Maya's military training had taught her to recognize the psychological and tactical indicators that preceded combat engagements. The leader's body language was showing increased tension, his weapon handling was becoming more aggressive, and his movement patterns were shifting from reconnaissance to assault preparation. She needed to act soon if she wanted to maintain the tactical advantage that her positioning provided. The leader began his final approach toward Maya's position, his weapon raised and his movements controlled but purposeful. Maya could see that he was committed to the engagement, and that further delay would only allow him to improve his tactical position. Her military training had taught her to recognize such moments and act decisively when the opportunity presented itself. Maya's finger took up the slack in her trigger as she prepared to engage the leader, her breathing controlled and her sight picture perfect. The familiar calm of combat focus settled over her as she prepared to use skills that she'd hoped never to need again. The quiet clerk who had processed memberships and counted ammunition inventory was gone forever, replaced by the Marine sniper, whose capabilities had been legendary throughout the special operations community. The leader stepped into Maya's field of fire, his attention focused on searching the area where he expected to find her. Maya could see his face clearly now, noting the controlled tension and professional focus that marked him as a skilled and dangerous opponent. But she could also see the subtle indicators of stress and fatigue that suggested he was operating beyond his optimal performance level. Maya's military training had taught her to exploit every available advantage, and she could see that the leader's positioning left him vulnerable to precise fire from her location. His body armor would provide some protection, but Maya's knowledge of terminal ballistics and her precision shooting skills would allow her to place shots where they would be most effective. The moment of engagement arrived as the leader's weapon began to swing toward Maya's position, his training and instincts finally detecting the threat that had been waiting for him. But Maya's military training and years of combat experience had prepared her for exactly this type of close-quarters engagement, and she was already responding before the leader had fully committed to his action. Maya's first shot struck the leader's weapon hand with surgical precision, the carefully placed round shattering bones and severing tendons with the devastating accuracy that had made her legendary among Marine Corps snipers. The tactical rifle spun from his grasp as his nervous system registered the catastrophic damage. But Maya's military training had taught her never to assume that a single shot would end a threat completely. Her second shot followed immediately, targeting the leader's knee joint with the same precision that had characterized her long-range work in Afghanistan. The leader collapsed instantly, his body hitting the concrete floor with the dead weight of someone whose structural integrity had been surgically destroyed. Maya maintained her sight picture for several seconds, watching for any sign of continued resistance, while her tactical awareness processed the broader situation. The engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds, but her military training had recorded every detail with crystalline clarity. Moving with the fluid efficiency that had characterized her combat operations, Maya advanced toward the fallen leader while maintaining awareness of potential threats from other directions. Her weapon remained trained on his center mass as she approached, ready to deliver additional shots if he showed any sign of continued resistance. The man's injuries were severe but not immediately life-threatening, a calculated decision that would allow for intelligence gathering if the situation permitted. "Stay down and don't move," Maya commanded, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had issued similar orders in life-or-death situations throughout her military career. The leader's eyes showed pain and shock, but also a grudging respect for the precision with which he'd been neutralized. His tactical training was good enough to recognize professional work when he experienced it firsthand. Maya quickly secured the leader's weapon, adding it to the growing collection of firearms she'd taken from the neutralized intruders. Her movements were economical and purposeful, each action serving multiple tactical objectives while maintaining her ability to respond to new threats. The facility's layout provided good visibility of the main areas, but Maya's military training had taught her to maintain constant awareness of potential blind spots and ambush positions. The main lobby area was in chaos, with civilians huddled behind whatever cover they could find, while trying to process the violent confrontation that had just occurred. Maya could see Diane crouched behind the main counter, her face pale with shock but her eyes showing the relief of someone who had just been rescued from a deadly situation. Tommy Patterson was visible near the shooting lanes, his military bearing evident as he maintained protective positioning over several customers who had taken cover nearby. "Everyone stay down until I've secured the area," Maya announced, her voice carrying throughout the facility with the authority of someone who was clearly in command of the situation. "The threat has been neutralized, but I need to make sure there aren't any additional hostiles before we can consider this over." Maya began a systematic sweep of the facility, her weapon ready as she checked each room and storage area for additional threats. Her military training had taught her never to assume that all hostile forces had been identified, and the professional nature of the attack suggested that additional support personnel might be positioned outside the facility. The sweep was thorough and methodical, covering every potential hiding place and escape route. The ammunition storage room contained the body of the first accomplice, his weapon secured and his threat permanently neutralized. Maya's shots had been precise and devastating, ending the engagement with the clinical efficiency that had characterized her sniper work. The second accomplice was still alive, but immobilized by his injuries, his body armor having saved his life while Maya's precision had eliminated his combat effectiveness. "This is Maya Rodriguez at Precision Point Shooting Range," she said into the facility's telephone as she contacted emergency services. "We've had an armed robbery with multiple hostiles. 3 suspects down, situation secure. We need police and medical response immediately." The dispatcher's voice carried professional urgency as she processed the information. "Ma'am, are you law enforcement? What's your status and current situation?" Maya hesitated briefly, knowing that her response would inevitably lead to questions about her background and capabilities. "I'm facility staff with military training. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but we need emergency response for casualties and crime scene processing." As she waited for law enforcement to arrive, Maya began the process of securing the scene and ensuring that the evidence would be properly preserved. Her military training had included instruction in crime scene management and evidence preservation, skills that were proving unexpectedly valuable in civilian law enforcement situations. The facility's security cameras would provide comprehensive documentation of the entire incident, but Maya wanted to ensure that physical evidence was properly protected. Tommy Patterson approached her position with the cautious respect of someone who had just witnessed exceptional combat performance. "Maya, I need to ask you something," he said quietly. Where did you learn to shoot like that? That wasn't civilian training. Maya looked at him with eyes that carried the weight of 8 years of combat experience and 67 confirmed kills. Marine Corps, she replied simply. I was a sniper. I requested transfer to civilian employment because I wanted to find peace, but sometimes the past doesn't give you a choice. Tommy nodded slowly, his own military background allowing him to understand the implications of what she'd just revealed. How many tours? He asked, his voice carrying the professional interest of one veteran talking to another. 4 deployments, Maya replied. Afghanistan, Iraq, and some places that don't officially exist. I was good at my job, Tommy, maybe too good. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of law enforcement. Multiple patrol cars and tactical units responding to the report of an active shooter situation. Maya placed her weapon on the ground and raised her hands, understanding that responding officers would need to secure the scene before they could begin processing what had happened. I'm Maya Rodriguez, facility employee, she announced as the first officers entered the building. I neutralized 3 armed suspects who were attempting to rob the facility. My weapon is on the ground, and I'm prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation. The lead officer approached with professional caution, his weapon ready as he assessed the situation. Ma'am, I need you to step away from the weapon and move toward the wall where my partner can secure you temporarily. This is standard procedure for active scenes. Maya complied immediately, her movements controlled and non-threatening as she positioned herself where the officers could maintain visual contact. Her military training had included instruction in dealing with law enforcement, and she understood the importance of following their procedures exactly. The officers were professional and courteous, but they needed to secure the scene before they could begin processing the details of what had occurred. Detective Sarah Walsh arrived 20 minutes later, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with the analytical precision of someone who had investigated countless violent crimes. Maya recognized her immediately as one of the attorneys who occasionally visited the range for recreational shooting. But their professional relationship would now be complicated by the circumstances of their meeting. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to ask you some questions about what happened here, Detective Walsh said as she approached Maya's position. But first, I want to make sure you understand that you're not under arrest, and that you're free to request legal representation if you choose. Maya nodded her understanding. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation, Detective. I acted in defense of myself and the other people in this facility. Everything I did was necessary to neutralize the threat and protect innocent lives. The preliminary interview lasted for over an hour, with Maya providing a detailed account of the tactical situation and her responses to each threat. Her military training had taught her to document engagements thoroughly, and she was able to provide precise information about timing, positioning, and decision-making factors that had influenced her actions. Detective Walsh's questions were professional and thorough, but Maya could see the growing recognition in her eyes as she began to understand the level of training and expertise that had been required to neutralize 3 armed suspects without civilian casualties. Ms. Rodriguez, your actions were clearly justified under Montana self-defense statutes, she said finally, but I have to ask about your background. The precision of your shooting and your tactical awareness suggest advanced military training. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that her carefully constructed civilian anonymity was about to end permanently. I was Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. I served as a sniper with 8 years of active duty, including 4 combat deployments. I have 67 confirmed kills and received multiple decorations for combat performance. The detective's eyebrows rose slightly as she processed this information. And you've been working as a clerk at a shooting range? That seems like a significant underutilization of your skills and training. I chose civilian employment because I wanted to find peace and purpose without the constant presence of violence, Maya replied. I thought I could leave my military skills behind and build a normal life. Today proved that some skills can't be discarded, and sometimes circumstances require you to use capabilities you'd rather forget. Detective Walsh nodded understandingly. Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to know that your actions today saved lives. The suspects were armed with military-grade weapons and had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. Without your intervention, this situation could have ended very differently. As the investigation continued, Maya found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she'd been the invisible clerk who processed memberships and counted ammunition inventory. Tonight she would be the subject of news reports and police interviews, her carefully constructed anonymity destroyed by the necessity of protecting innocent lives. The facility's security cameras had recorded the entire incident, providing law enforcement with comprehensive documentation of the tactical situation and Maya's response. The footage would show the precision and professionalism of her actions, but it would also reveal capabilities that she'd worked hard to keep hidden from the civilian world. Dr. Richard Hawthorne approached her as the scene was being processed, his face showing a mixture of relief and amazement. Maya, I had no idea about your background. You saved our lives today, and I want you to know how grateful we all are. Maya looked around the facility at the faces of colleagues and customers who would never see her the same way again. The quiet clerk who had given them advice about ammunition selection and rifle maintenance had been revealed as one of the most skilled and decorated combat veterans in Marine Corps' history. Her carefully constructed civilian life was over, but she'd found something else in its place, the knowledge that her skills could still serve a purpose in protecting innocent people. I did what needed to be done, Maya replied simply. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes that's exactly what the situation requires. 6 months later, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at the Montana Law Enforcement Academy, her Marine dress blues replaced by a custom, tactical instructor's uniform, bearing the insignia of her new position, Director of Advanced Marksmanship Training. The transformation had been as dramatic as it was unexpected. Today's lesson isn't just about precision shooting, Maya addressed the assembled police officers and federal agents. It's about making impossible decisions under extreme pressure and living with the consequences of those decisions. The attack at Precision Point had changed everything. The FBI's investigation revealed that the 3 suspects had been part of a larger terrorist cell planning coordinated attacks on civilian targets across the region. Maya's intervention hadn't just saved the people in the facility, it had prevented a much larger tragedy. The governor had personally recruited Maya to develop a new training program combining her military expertise with civilian law enforcement needs. She'd accepted on one condition: she would continue working part-time at Precision Point, helping ordinary citizens improve their shooting skills and confidence. Some of you might wonder why I left the military, Maya continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. I thought I wanted peace. But I learned that true peace isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about being prepared to protect others when conflict finds you. Tommy Patterson, now her assistant instructor, smiled from the front row. The quiet clerk had become a legend, but more importantly, she'd found her true calling. Remember, Maya concluded, the most important shot you'll ever take isn't the one that ends a threat. It's the one that saves an innocent life. If you enjoyed this incredible story of hidden courage and unexpected heroism, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought about Maya's transformation from invisible clerk to legendary protector. What other hidden heroes might be walking among us? Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this inspiring tale of courage and redemption.